My daughter-in-law looked at the gift in my wife's hands, then laughed right there in front of the whole ceremony. "Too cheap," she said, loud enough for everyone to hear. I stood frozen, my hands gripping the back of my wife's wheelchair, as she told the staff to take the gift away and burn it so it wouldn't be an eyesore. The $1 million wedding fell silent for a very brief second. My son didn't object. He just avoided his mother's eyes. No one in that room knew that in that exact moment, the very last door between us slammed shut. If you're listening to this story, subscribe to the channel and leave a comment telling me what country you're listening from. Now, let me tell you what happened next. Later that very same evening, I slowly pushed my wife's wheelchair through the main hall of the castle. The cold stone beneath the wheels made a soft, steady sound, each roll clearly audible. That sound felt out of place among the music, the clinking glasses, and the long dresses brushing the floor. Martha sat very straight. Her hands rested neatly in her lap. Her knuckles were swollen with pain, but she didn't complain. She just stared straight ahead, as if she didn't want anyone to feel the need to look away from her eyes. We were guided to a table at the far end of the hall, near the kitchen doors. I knew exactly why. The lighting there was too dim for photographs. Our faces wouldn't appear in any frame. Jessica had planned it carefully. She didn't want our aged appearance to ruin a perfect day paid for with money. I didn't object. I was used to silence. A lifetime of working with machines taught me that sometimes speaking changes nothing. Martha was different. She tilted her head slightly toward me, her eyes carrying an apology for something she never caused. I gently squeezed her hand, letting her know it was all right. The table was covered with dishes I couldn't even name. Servers moved back and forth, careful not to look at us for too long. I heard whispers behind us. I couldn't tell if they were curious or sympathetic. I didn't turn around. I just looked at the small wooden box resting on Martha's lap. She had held onto it since we got out of the car. The box wasn't large, just big enough to sit on someone's lap. The wood was smooth, but not polished. The edges weren't perfect. Every joint showed it had been made by hand, not by some luxury workshop. I clearly remembered those evenings Martha spent by the window, yellow light falling over her trembling hands. 6 months, little by little. I had offered to hire someone to help, but she shook her head. She said there were some things you couldn't hand off to others. When the host invited both families forward to present their gifts, the entire hall turned toward us. I stood first, then carefully pushed the wheelchair down the main aisle. Martha lowered her head slightly, as if asking the room for permission to exist in this moment. Jessica stepped toward us. Her wedding dress sparkled under the lights. Her smile was perfectly placed, not off by even the smallest measure. I handed her the box and offered a few simple wishes. Martha smiled, her eyes lighting up for just a moment. It was the look of a mother who believed her effort would be seen. Jessica opened the box immediately. In that instant, I knew everything had slipped off course. Her smile froze, then turned into a short, sharp laugh. She lifted the wooden house model, turning it over in her hands, as if deciding whether it even deserved to exist there. "Seriously," she said, loud enough. At a wedding like this, no one answered. I could hear my own heartbeat. Slow but heavy. Martha kept smiling, but the corners of her mouth began to tremble. Jessica turned to my son. William stood there holding a glass of wine, his eyes shifting away. He didn't look at his mother. He didn't look at me. He stared at the floor, as if searching for an invisible exit. "Next time," William said, his voice calm and light, "cash would be more convenient." The words hit the floor like something heavy. Nothing shattered, but everything went silent. I felt Martha's hand tighten around mine. She didn't cry. She simply let out a long, quiet breath, as if holding herself together took everything she had. Jessica handed the model to a nearby server. "Take it outside," she said. "Don't leave it here." The server looked at me, hesitating for a second. I nodded. Not because I agreed, but because I knew that objecting now would only hurt Martha more. The server walked away, carrying 6 months of my wife's work, like something without a name. The hall slowly grew noisy again. The music resumed. Laughter returned, as if nothing had happened. We were invited back to our table. I pushed the wheelchair away, feeling like I was retreating from a line I had tried to hold for years. When we sat down, Martha placed her hand over mine. She said nothing. I looked at her face, the wrinkles deeper from holding everything in. And in that moment, I understood something with painful clarity. My silence, all those years, had protected no one. It had only allowed moments like this to happen, right in front of us, in a hall filled with light. I didn't stay at the banquet table for long. Neither did Martha. I asked if she wanted to step outside for some air, and she nodded immediately, faster than I expected. I pushed her wheelchair through the glass doors leading to the balcony behind the castle. Out there, it was quieter, just the sound of wind rising from the sea, and warm yellow lights stretching across the lawn. Martha stared into the distance for a long time. I knew she was trying to keep her hands from shaking. I bent down and adjusted the thin blanket over her knees, as if that small act could fix anything. She placed her hand on my wrist very gently. "It's okay," she said. Her voice was so calm it unsettled me. I understood that calm wasn't because she was fine. It was because she was used to enduring. I told her I'd go get her a glass of water. I wanted her sitting there looking at the ocean, not at the hall for one more minute. As I turned away, I heard her exhale softly, like she'd just set down a heavy weight. The hallway back inside was narrow and darker than the main hall. I walked slowly. I didn't want to return to those lights, but I needed an excuse to stand up to leave. As I neared a small lounge beside the hall, I heard familiar voices, William's voice and Jessica's. I stopped, not out of curiosity, but because my name was mentioned. They were speaking with a thin man in a gray suit, a briefcase clutched tightly under his arm. I couldn't see his face, but I knew the type. A broker. Always speaking just softly enough so no one else hears, but clear enough for the right people. William spoke first. His voice was low-rushed. He didn't sound like the boy who used to follow me around the workshop asking why one gear fit into another. He talked about numbers, about timing, about needing to take care of things quickly. Jessica stood beside him, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the man. She didn't interrupt. She only nodded now and then, as if confirming a plan already agreed upon. I stood behind the stone wall, close enough to hear every word. William said that after the wedding he'd come visit us. He said he needed me to sign a few papers. Just formalities. He mentioned the old machine shop, the piece of land behind the house. He said those assets had been sitting idle for too long. The man asked carefully. William replied that I wouldn't suspect anything, that I always trusted my son, that I never asked too many questions. Jessica laughed. Not loudly, but coldly. She said that if I hesitated, they already had another option. She mentioned Martha's health, how she wouldn't be able to take care of herself long term. She said there were places more suitable for people like her, cheaper, with fewer questions. That sentence made my hand tighten, not out of anger, but because of a very clear feeling, like a door inside me had just closed. No noise, no shattering, just closed. The man jotted something down and nodded. He asked when they wanted to proceed. William said soon. Jessica said as soon as possible, as if they were planning a trip, not discussing the lives of the two people who brought William into this world. I stepped back. Then another step. I didn't want to hear more. I had heard enough. What remained didn't need explanation. When I returned to the balcony, Martha was still there. She turned her head at the sound of the wheels. I handed her the glass of water. She took a small sip, then set it down. Her eyes rested on my face for a long moment. "Is something wrong?" she asked. I shook my head, not because nothing was wrong, but because I wasn't ready to speak yet. I sat down in the chair beside her, a little lower. I looked at her hands, the swollen joints, the thin, wrinkled skin. I remembered every small cut. Every evening she had to stop because of the pain, then continue making that gift. I placed my hand over hers. Mine was rough, full of calluses. Hers was light and warm. In that moment, I understood what I had avoided for years. I had been silent for too long. I thought keeping the peace meant protecting the family, but in truth my silence only created a space, and that space had been filled with calculation. Martha didn't ask anything more. She just looked at me, as if she was used to waiting for me to speak when the time was right. I looked out at the sea, then back at the light spilling onto the balcony from the hall. The music was still playing. The wedding was still going on. But for me, that ceremony was already over. I stood up and turned Martha's wheelchair back inside, not to return to the table, but to do something else, something I should have done a long time ago. I didn't feel angry anymore, only a cold, clear awareness, and I knew that from this moment on, nothing would follow the path William and Jessica had laid out. I took Martha into a small resting room near the side hall. It was quieter there, soft lighting, No one passing by. I adjusted the pillow behind her back and set the glass of water on the table beside her chair. She looked at me, her eyes asking what I planned to do next. I told her to rest for a bit. I said it calmly, as if everything was still under control. When the door closed, I stood there for a moment. I could hear the music drifting in from the main hall, steady and unhurried. I took a deep breath, not to calm myself, but to confirm that I was ready. I took out my phone. My contact list isn't long. I don't keep many relationships, but there are names I have never deleted. I dialed the first number. No introductions were needed. The line was silent for a few seconds, then came the usual short reply. "I'm listening." I said I needed them to be there. Right now. I gave the location. No further explanation. I didn't need to explain. They understood that when I called at this hour under these circumstances, it wasn't a social invitation. I hung up and dialed the second number, then the third. Each call lasted only a few sentences. No one asked why. No one hesitated. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, feeling a little lighter, like I had finally set down a weight I'd been carrying for too long. I returned to the side hall. I didn't step into the main area where the crowd was laughing and talking. I stayed at the edge where I could see without being noticed. William and Jessica were standing near the small stage, chatting with a few guests. They smiled at the right moments. They nodded in the right places. They looked perfectly suited to this scene. About 20 minutes later, I heard cars pulling up outside the gate. Not one car, several. I couldn't see them yet, but I felt the shift in the air immediately. The servers began glancing toward the entrance. A few guests turned their heads, curious. The large doors opened. A group of people walked in. They weren't loud. No one was dressed to stand out. But the way they moved, the way they scanned the room, made it clear they weren't ordinary wedding guests. I recognized every face. People who had signed agreements hundreds of pages long with me. People who had sat across from me in windowless rooms. William reacted first. I saw him turn to Jessica and whisper something. His eyes lit up. He grabbed her hand and moved quickly toward the new arrivals. Jessica adjusted her dress. Her smile snapped back into place. I stayed where I was. I didn't step forward. I didn't need to. William reached out his hand, introducing himself. He spoke about the wedding, about the honor of welcoming important partners. Jessica stood beside him, nodding, her eyes measuring, as if calculating the value of each person. But none of them shook William's hand. They walked straight past him and stopped in front of me. I felt eyes from the crowd begin to turn in our direction. One of them gave a slight bow, just enough for me and him to understand, not meant for anyone else. "Mr. Miller," he said, "we're ready." I nodded. That was all. I sensed William freeze behind me. I didn't turn around. I didn't need to see his reaction. I already knew. Jessica broke the silence. She stepped a little closer, her voice carefully controlled. She asked who these people were. She asked in what capacity they were here. No one answered her. They waited for me. I turned and looked straight at William. For the first time that evening, I held my son in my gaze for a long moment. I didn't see a child. I saw an adult who had grown comfortable advancing on the silence of others. "Find the gift," I said to a nearby server. My voice wasn't raised. But it was clear. The server flinched slightly, then nodded and hurried away. Jessica opened her mouth as if to say something. I didn't look at her. I didn't give her the space to step in. I turned back to the people who had arrived. I thanked them for coming so quickly. I told them I needed them here. To witness. Not to intervene. Just to witness. They understood. They stepped back, half a pace, forming a quiet line behind me. The atmosphere in the hall began to change. Conversations faded. The music kept playing, but no one was listening anymore. Eyes searched for a fixed point. And that point, though no one said it out loud, was me. I thought of Martha sitting in that small resting room. I thought of her hands, of the wooden model that had been carried away like something disposable. I thought of the conversation I had overheard, of the plans made behind our backs. I didn't feel victorious. I didn't feel hurt anymore either. Just a rare clarity, like when a machine, after years of running, finally makes a sound that tells you exactly which part has worn down. The server returned, holding the wooden model in both arms. It was intact. I noticed a small scratch on the edge of the roof. Nothing serious, but I remembered it. I took the gift back. Its weight was familiar, lighter than it looked to outsiders. I turned toward the crowd. I knew that from this moment on there was no turning back, and I also knew this was only the beginning of a truth they were not ready to hear. I held the wooden house model in my hands and walked slowly into the center of the hall. I didn't ask for the music to stop. I didn't need a stage. I just needed the room to be quiet enough, so what was about to be said wouldn't get lost. The people around me stepped back on their own. No one told them to. I set the model on the nearest table. The light above revealed every rough joint, every uneven grain in the wood. I knew many people in that room were thinking what Jessica had thought, that it didn't belong here. I let them think that for a few more seconds. My wife made this, I said. My voice was low and steady. By hand. I didn't mention 6 months. I didn't talk about the nights she had to stop because of pain. I didn't need pity. I only needed the truth to stand still in front of everyone. Jessica stepped forward half a pace. I heard the fabric of her dress brush the floor. She opened her mouth, then closed it again. I looked at her, then at William. My son stood slightly behind her, his face pale. He knew. He was beginning to understand that this was no longer a performance he could control. I placed my finger on the roof of the wooden house. There was a tiny spot there, one almost no one would notice. I pressed down. Not hard, just enough. A soft click sounded. The roof opened. Not dramatically. It simply split cleanly in two. Inside, the light reflected off a thin metal object and a carefully wrapped stack of papers. The room went completely silent. This silence was different from the one born of humiliation. It was heavier, and no one dared to break it. I took out the metal object first. A small card, pale gold in color. I didn't raise it. I set it beside the model. Then I took the papers. I opened them just enough for the people closest to see the title on the first page. I didn't read it out loud. I didn't need to. Those words spoke for themselves. "This is a house," I said, "not a model." I paused and let the sentence move through the room. I saw a few people inhale softly. I saw Jessica stare at the papers, as if they had changed shape in front of her. William stepped forward, then stopped, as if he was afraid to get too close. "I planned to give it to you today," I continued. "Not because of the wedding, but because I thought, after everything, this was the right time." In my mind, I saw Martha. I remembered her eyes when she handed over the box, not asking for praise, only for respect. But there's one thing I said. Every gift comes with a condition, not one written on paper, one written in how people treat each other. I turned to Jessica, not sharply, not with sarcasm, just directly. "You were right," I said. "If the person receiving it has no heart, then it's just wood." Jessica shook her head, about to speak. I lifted my hand slightly, not to command, just to ask for a moment. "I've heard enough," I said, "about plans, about signatures, about places that are more suitable." William flinched. He opened his mouth. I looked at him, and he stopped. I folded the papers and handed them to the person beside me, not for safekeeping, but to remove them from the reach of hands that did not deserve to touch them right now. "From this point on," I said, "all financial support ends." No one shouted. No one gasped. Truth, when spoken calmly, carries its own weight. "The apartment you're living in," I continued, "is under my name. You'll have time to move out. There's no need for arguments." Jessica let out a short, sharp laugh. She said something about rights, about family. I didn't respond. I turned to the people standing behind me. They didn't speak. They simply nodded, confirming that what I said could be carried out immediately. I looked back at the wooden model. I rested my hand on the open roof. "This gift," I said, "will not be given today." I paused for one more beat. "I'll transfer its value to people who understand gratitude, to those who have no one standing up for them when they grow weak." I didn't name the foundation. I didn't mention figures. The room understood that the decision was final. I closed the roof of the house. The click sounded again, like a full stop. I picked up the model. Its weight hadn't changed, but its meaning had. I turned away, no longer looking at the crowd. I walked toward the side hall, toward where Martha was waiting. Behind me, no one followed. No one called my name. Some doors, once closed, no longer respond to voices from behind. When I opened the door to the small resting room, Martha looked up. She glanced at the model in my hands, then into my eyes. I nodded. No long explanation needed. "We're going home," I said. She smiled, a very gentle smile. And this time, It didn't tremble. We left the castle without any rush. No one stopped us. No one felt confident enough to ask where I was going. I pushed Martha's wheelchair along the gravel path toward the gate where the sea breeze drifted in and the salt hung in the air. The lights behind us were still on, but the sound had changed. It was no longer a celebration, just a large room trying to swallow a new kind of silence. When the gate closed behind us, I paused for a moment. Martha placed her hand over mine. She didn't ask if I regretted anything. She didn't need that answer. She looked at me for a long time, then said, "I feel lighter." I nodded. So did I. Light in the way someone feels after setting down a burden they didn't even realize they'd been carrying for years. We got into the car, not the luxury one parked near the main entrance, but the same car that had brought us there. I drove slowly so Martha could look at the sea a little longer. She leaned her head back against the seat, eyes closed. I knew she wasn't sleeping. She was just letting everything settle. The next morning my phone rang again and again. I didn't answer right away. I made tea for Martha, helped her sit up, opened the window to let the sunlight into the room. When everything was settled, only then did I pick up the phone. Messages came in rapidly. Different senders. Same meaning. Chaos. Cut-offs. Consequences. I answered one call. Just one. William's voice on the other end wasn't steady anymore. He talked about misunderstandings, about pressure, about things going too far. I listened until he was done. I didn't interrupt. When he stopped, I said slowly, "You chose how you treated your mother. The rest, I've already handled." I ended the call. No anger. No sense of victory. Just the end of a conversation that should never have lasted that long. In the days that followed, everything unfolded exactly as I had said. Agreements were closed. Doors that once stayed open because of my silence were now shut because of my choice. I didn't track every step. I didn't need to. I spent my time with Martha. We went away, not to run from anything, but to begin a part of our lives we had postponed for too long. The sea where we went was calmer. In the mornings I made coffee. Martha sat by the window, sunlight resting on her hands. She didn't build wooden models anymore. She just knitted small pieces. For herself. One afternoon she said she wanted to go outside. I pushed her wheelchair onto the porch. The breeze was gentle. Martha looked at me and smiled. I think she said that gift finished its job. I understood. Not the house, not the papers, but the truth that had been exposed. The truth that love cannot survive contempt. And that protection, even when it comes late, still matters, if it is firm enough. A few months later I received a letter. Not from William, from a stranger. They wrote that a senior support fund had helped them find a safe place to live. They said they didn't need to know my name. They just wanted to say thank you. I placed the letter on the table next to the wooden model. The roof was still closed. I didn't open it again. I didn't need to. That evening, Martha asked if I had any regrets. I thought for a moment, then answered. Only that I didn't act sooner. She held my hand, said nothing more. Now as I tell this story, I'm not telling it to judge anyone. I'm telling it as a reminder. There are gifts that cannot be measured by money, and there are moments when choosing silence comes at the cost of the very people you love most. If you're holding a gift made with a whole heart, don't dismiss it too quickly, because when you set it down, you may also be closing the only door that ever truly protected you. If you've stayed with me all the way to the end, thank you for listening to this story. If it made you slow down for even a moment or think differently about family press, like to support the channel. Subscribe and share if you believe stories like this need to be told. Not to judge, but to remind us. The lesson I took from it is simple. A person's value is not in the gift they give, but in the heart they place inside it. And sometimes the bravest thing is not enduring more, but drawing a line to protect the people you love. Thank you for staying, and may you always be clear-headed enough to cherish the quietest things in your life.